Streamlining application deployment to AWS ECS with GitHub Actions, a comprehensive guide. This podcast is brought to you by Business Compass LLC. We are an Amazon Web Services advanced consulting partner. We build and migrate workloads to Amazon Cloud. Our website is businesscompassllc.com. Our phone number is 973-638-2228. Our email address is contact@businesscompassllc.us. Introduction to AWS ECS and the benefits of continuous deployment. Amazon Elastic Container Service, ECS, is a highly scalable container orchestration service that allows you to run, stop, and manage Docker containers on a cluster of Amazon EC2 instances or AWS Fargate. One of the most compelling benefits of using ECS is the seamless integration with other AWS services, enabling robust and efficient application deployments. Continuous deployment, CD, is a crucial practice in modern DevOps pipelines, ensuring that code changes are automatically deployed to production environments after passing all tests, which leads to faster delivery and more reliable releases. Preparing your AWS environment. To set up continuous deployment on AWS ECS using GitHub Actions. Prepare your AWS environment by setting up an Elastic Container Registry, ECR, creating an ECS cluster, and defining the necessary tasks. Setting up an ECR registry. Amazon ECR is a fully managed Docker container registry that makes storing, managing, and deploying Docker container images easy. To set up an ECR registry, log in to the AWS Management Console and navigate to the ECR service. Create a new repository by clicking the Create Repository button. Name your repository and configure any additional settings as needed. Note the repository URI. You will need this to push your Docker images later. Pushing your Docker image to ECR. After setting up the ECR registry, the next step is to push your Docker image to it. Authenticate Docker to the ECR registry using the AWS CLI command. AWS ECR get login password region your region. Docker login username AWS password state in your account ID dar.ecr.your region amazonoz.com. Tag your Docker image to match the repository URI. Docker tag image ID your account ID dkr.ecr.your region amazonoz.com/your repository tag. Push the image to ECR. Docker push your account ID dkr.ecr.your region amazon.com/your repository tag. Creating your ECS cluster and task definition. With your Docker image in ECR, the next step is to set up an ECS cluster and define the task to run your application. Defining your cluster. Navigate to the ECS service in the AWS Management Console. Create a new cluster by selecting the appropriate template, for example, EC2 Linux plus networking. Configure the cluster by specifying the cluster name, instance type, and desired number of instances. Specifying your task definition. Create a new task definition by navigating to the Task Definitions tab and clicking Create New Task Definition. Define the task role in network mode. Specify the container name, image URI, from ECR, memory, CPU units, and port mappings to add containers to the task. Initial manual deployment for testing and verification. Before automating the deployment process, it's crucial to test and verify the setup manually. Create a service from your task definition. Run the service on your ECS cluster and monitor the logs to ensure your application runs correctly. Automating continuous deployment with GitHub Actions. Once the manual deployment is verified, you can automate the process using GitHub Actions. Setting up OIDI key provider in AWS GitHub Actions uses OpenID Connect, OIDC, to authenticate with AWS securely. To set this up, go to the IAM service in the AWS Management Console. Create an identity provider for OIDI and select GitHub as the provider. Specify the audience as sts.amazonoz.com. Creating an IAM role in AWS, you need to create an IAM role that GitHub Actions can assume to deploy your application. Create a new IAM role with a trust relationship with the OIDI provider. Attach the necessary permissions, for example, Amazon EC2 Container Service Full Access and Amazon EC2 Container Registry Full Access, to the role, completing the GitHub Actions workflow. Now that your AWS environment is ready, you can set up the GitHub Actions workflow. Create a github/workflows/deploy.yml file in your repository. Define the workflow to build the Docker image, push it to ECR, and update the ECS service with a new task definition. Use the AWS Actions/configure AWS credentials action to authenticate with AWS using the OIDI provider. Name. Deploy to ECS. On. Push. Branches. Main. Jobs. Deploy. Runs on. Ubuntu latest. Steps. Name, checkout code. Uses, actions/checkout at v2. Name, setup Docker build teas. Uses, docker/setup buildex action at v1. Name, login to Amazon ECR ID, login ECR. Uses, AWS actions/Amazon ECR login at v1. Name, build, tag, and push the image to ECR run. Docker build t my app. Docker tag my app latest $steps.login ECR.outputs.registry/my repo latest. Docker push $steps.login ECR.outputs.registry/my repo latest. Name, deploy to ECS. Uses, AWS actions/Amazon ECS deploy task definition at v1. With task definition, my taskdef.json. Service, my service. Cluster, my cluster. Wait for service stability, true. Validating your continuous deployment success. After setting up the GitHub Actions workflow, validate the deployment process by checking the following. Confirming image in ECR. Verify that the new Docker image has been pushed to the ECR repository. Testing updated application. Test the updated application in the ECS cluster to ensure the changes are correctly deployed. Conclusion and next steps. Continuous deployment to AWS ECS using GitHub Actions streamlines your deployment pipeline, reducing the time and effort required to release updates. Following this podcast, you can automate the entire process, ensuring that your applications are always up to date with the latest changes. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please share this podcast, visit our website and follow our social media links.